I will hand it over to you. Anna, wonderful to see you.
Thank you
Wonderful to
so
have
much.
you here. Take it away.
First and foremost, like, thank you so much for having me. I've been obviously following you for a long, long time, so I'm glad that we finally meet, like, in, well, almost real life. And thank you everybody for showing up. I'm humbled and I'm a little anxious if I will not disappoint you. But my name's Anna and I'm currently in Paris. I live in France. I've been living here for many years, but I used to work in New York City for quite a bit, and then now I work for a wonderful Canadian company that is based in Montreal called Moment Factory. But I'm based off the Paris office here in Europe. So, but I was originally born in Warsaw, Poland. Many, many, many years ago. It's a little bit of a passion project I've been working on and trying just to understand the phenomenon of immersive art, where it comes from, and also like is this something that is going to stay with us and what is the kind of logic behind this phenomenon. I'm a curator and I work with immersive media. I've been in the immersive interactive industry for since I started in 2013 when I moved from traditional audiovisual production, filmmaking, television. My background is originally in theater and I have a degree in art history, but I was always passionate about people who are trying to look at the outskirts of creative industries of for the next big thing, and that's where most of the creative adventures were happening. So I moved to interactive 2013 and I was working since as a curator, and I work a lot as a strategist, and I used to produce a lot of my own projects with some of the companies or organizations that are listed here. Obviously there's been more, but I had the pleasure of working with various cultural organizations and media organizations in North America and Canada and in the US and in Europe as well, and in France as well. So what I was really privileged with was that through my practice, I got access to incredible artists coming from very different creative disciplines and very different backgrounds. People coming from visual arts like Shirin Nishat and photography, people coming strictly from digital art or new media art. Obviously, we're not going to discuss definitions and language here right now, but also people working with in performing arts, music, and it was really a tremendous adventure these past couple of years trying to curate shows and markets and festivals and exhibitions with them. It's a beautiful community and there's so much going on. And some of them have a really hard time proving the value of their work. And I always want to make sure that we can be advocates of their creation. I'm showing you some of the visuals from exhibitions I created and produced. These are visuals from the exhibition we did as a guest show at Tribeca Festival in 2024 at Mercer Labs when it opened. So this is a beautiful venue, and we had access to two floors out of three where we had a curation of independent works from artists in our community. We also work with someone's drawing on my screen. We also work with spatial sound with an incredible Berlin-based studio called Monum, which is part of the 4D sound team, which is a terrific experience that started my passion for spatial audio and how we can work without imagery, but with deep, beautiful, immersive sound. We did cinematic adaptation, someone's still drawing on my screen, of works that were previously shown as video works like The Great Endeavor by Liam Young that we adapted for a five channel immense installation. But I also work with independent or smaller venues that are primarily interested in digital art, technology, and science. These are visuals from a recent show last year that we did in Belgium with some of my wonderful collaborators and friends, Marshmallow Laserface, Nancy Baker Cahill. Congratulations on your award, Nancy. And obviously, we did also lots of VR curation at Tribeca with incredible directors and studios. And we always try to put a lot of care in how the work was presented. I work with Moment Factory. Now I'm in a creative director position since last year, and it's been a beautiful adventure. If you are not familiar somehow with the work of this incredible studio, please make sure to learn what they do. I truly believe Moment Factory has really shown how immersive methodologies can be adapted to almost any creation that we can imagine, from performing arts, live music, sports, museum, entertainment, games, anything. Like there's no medium that this company hasn't worked with, and I'm really proud to be part of that team and to learn from them. But I also work with art organizations. I work with the Barbican Centre, and we just finished a very interesting project where we had a closed door meeting of 50 leaders from leading museums and galleries discussing innovation and the role of digital and immersive programming, but also creative R&D and how we're building art organizations of the future. This was I was really proud to have some of the greatest and most passionate people in the room, and we're going to come up with some learnings from it very, very soon. And again, just to come back quickly to Tribeca, some of the visuals of the works we've done, which was, again, this is a beautiful installation that keeps on evolving by Memo Axon and Katie Peyton Hofstadter. They worked together on a work that has various chapters and iterations. I discovered it after they've done their first edition for the Venice Biennale, and then we invited them to build a bespoke version for us. And then since then, it has went a long, long way forward. But that was an early version and was extremely successful. And it uses a lot of Memo's ability to working with AI and Katie's performing arts experience and writing experience. ScanLab, one of my favorite studios to work with, Sutu, and then a lot of the beautiful visuals from a young emerging artist from Taiwan, Wen Yisheh, who worked primarily with a black and white color palette. So these are the kind of artists that I was always attracted to, and obviously I started asking myself a question like, okay, so what are we dealing with? What is immersive art? And there are so many answers to that question. There are amazing experts around the globe who are, trying to analyze it from various perspectives. So obviously, this is not going to be a compendium of the knowledge that is available, but it's going to be a more of a personal take. I mean, I love this medium, having been through theater and film and opera and even sports, because it's everywhere. It allows you to do anything you want. It can be as tiny as your, iPhone screen, and it can be as big of as a facade of the building, or even, the whole street if you wanted to. And, it can overtake a stadium, or it can be something that is a very intimate, personal experience. And it's really, we don't think about it that way, but it's really all around us when we think about it nowadays. And it can be many things, it doesn't have to be digital. It can be either digital, it can be purely analog. For many people, this is something that is totally valid and understandable. And examples are, in all the layers of our, day-to-day life, from marketing to entertainment, live, sports, music, everything is potentially immersive. And as we can see, there's a reason why. And there are very different definitions. There are different schools of like what makes immersive. Like I'm sure you've seen so many exchanges like this is not really an immersive work. No, it is actually immersive. It is immersive for me. And there are various classifications, and when you work with different types of creatives and studios and organizations, you will see that there are these kind of like groups and trends. There's been a lot of conversation about spatial creation and spatial computing, and this is something that often comes from people who are working with extended realities, with world building, with digital environments. There are people who are more focused on the function of the embodiment, the fact that it has to have this core sense of physical presence, and it oftentimes is related to various additional elements like haptics or real-time simulation. And there are people who are more focused on the transformative function of immersive, which is kind of like guiding us more into the experiential part of the scene, where you can have all sorts of multisensory triggers, where it's really about participation and agency and this kind of like collective joy or collective adventure. So there's so many different versions of what immersive can be. And the fun fact is that, it kind of started as something that belonged to a on one hand to the commercial sector, but on the other hand to very niche kind of like independent creatives. Like we used to meet in, basements to do VR, never worked, and and we still loved it, and we were coming back for more. And now suddenly, it's everywhere. I was just speaking to Josh about the exhibition that the incredible M Plus Museum in Hong Kong is currently having on view about, again, with this explanation, this is why I put the screenshot on. It's like, where's the immersive kind of like environment fascination coming from? So they're hosting installations by Judy Chicago and Yoko Ono, also tracing, kind of like the sources of the popularity of the current immersive creations in the artworks that were made specifically by women in the past. But, some time ago already, the Shed has also had an exhibition that was marketed as an immersive experience, and it was based on augmented reality replicas of Christo and Jean-Claude's intervention in the Central Park. So museums and legacy organizations have jumped on board a while ago, but there's this increasing interest, this understanding, like, how do we do it well? Like, what does it mean? Where does it come from? And I do believe that it's less now a conversation about where does the hype come from, but what does it say about the culture of our times? And when I was thinking about it initially, I was obviously struck by the fact that we know, and Josh obviously is an expert here, you know, your app, I think, is doing a great job of also like creating this kind of access to things that historically were inaccessible for so many people, not because of geographical and economical constraints, but also, intellectual or like psychological constraints. The art world is can feel like a hostile space for many people. It's so easy to feel excluded from it and to make it feel like it's hermetic or intimidating. And digital art is also not easy in that way, but immersive art is the exact opposite. Immersive art is super welcoming, and this was part of the conversation we had with Andras, because we started talking about it when we met first time in Madrid during a panel we were doing together, and the freedom that you get as an audience member when you go into an immersive work, the kind of validation that you can come as you are. You can actually just cross that threshold without feeling that there's an expectation towards you. And then there's obviously the power of what it can do. When we were doing the show at Mercer Labs, you know I felt like it feels like theater. It behaves like theater. It feels like a movie, but it has an operatic quality. And then if you have a possibility of working with certain tools, the physical power of that experience when you're sharing with other people, it's insane. But the freedom that you can actually start watching it whenever you want, you can leave whenever you want. The spatial, kind of like I would say, system that is not putting you in a place of a viewer that has to contemplate someone's vision of the world. It all matters so much to people. And this is why we know we had crowds of people of all ages, all social groups, hardcore working class people who were paying $52 for a ticket, bringing their kids, their grandparents. Like, how often do you see that, in a top level museum? I mean, come on. And there's obviously a lot of reasons for us, people who are working with creation, for why this is attractive. Nancy's mushroom cloud experience that I was also involved in New York City has this power of putting you in a situation that can be 1 or 2 minutes long, but it tells you a story that if you were to use a traditional storytelling methodology would take you hours or days or weeks to actually consume. So this is a story living experience, to quote Rich Whitehead, who I love that phrasing that she came up with, that it's a story living experience rather than storytelling experience. And this is a screenshot from an incredible piece by Shirin Nishat called The Fury, which was just one scene in VR, and then it was put in between a two-channel video installation. It was shot in New York, and we had a world premiere of this work. And it's so simple. It's just a 360 camera, and it's 8 minutes long. But you're in a place with this girl who's dancing surrounded by soldiers, and at a certain point, they're just approaching you, and that's it. I mean, such a beautifully done experience. And I mean, we're not going to talk about empathy machine and VR because this is a whole other conversation. But there is a potential to inspire change because you are being put in an environment in a way that your brain is memorizing differently. So the potential to create impact is there. And also like the way you can, in a playful, very accessible way, intervene with reality by putting layers on top of it. I think today we underappreciate the role of AR and social activism. This is a screenshot from a very successful hack that happened at the Met Museum by a team of artists. They teamed up with Sutu and iJack to put AR versions of paintings that were promoting this kind of colonial vision of the land. And it was just incredible to see how powerful that intervention was. But obviously, it still can be used, and I still find experiences that are so surprising, so refreshing that you don't really get that quality in traditional media. The amount of formats, the amount of genres, the amount of platforms that this kind of like creates and incubates is countless. And, this is just some examples of like these containers into which you can put some of these works. So we have, obviously virtual reality and augmented reality. We have immersive exhibitions, we have spatial sound exhibitions, immersive theater, installations like the ones that Rafael Lozano is doing that have this insane quality of engaging you through spatial installations and various techniques that are engaging your whole body, and world building practices that will become increasingly important, especially I think now when we're entering the conversation about the world models. But where does this whole thing come from? Is it a discipline? Is it something that's going to remove the way we think about art and just replace it with something completely different? I want to say no, but before I say it, I want to say like this is not where immersive comes from. There are so many studies that are looking at various kind of like obsessions with like 360 or VR illusions. There's obviously a whole conversation about the role of like various kind of like Luna Park, like theme park, kind of like provenance, but there's so much more to it. It's not just this. And when I curated a show in Belgium that I mentioned before, they asked me, so like, can you do a historical introduction to like where this whole thing came from? So like, well, I can. It's just that nobody has done it before. So, like, I'm just going to take a stab at it. And what I came up with is that I realized very quickly that there's no one route, there's no one history, there's no one art history of immersive art. There are all these different phenomena and these genres and these foundational stories that you can find in the gestures and decisions and experiments of different artists across the past. I'm just taking 150 years here, like, because obviously this could go um, much deeper into history, but we actually are being nourished by histories of visual arts before the internet, after the internet, the history of theater, the whole history of the reform, and how we're discussing like taking down the fourth wall, participatory theater. Obviously, the whole history of cinema is technically about this ambition of putting you in a place where you're almost it's the as if you were there moment. So I was thinking about, I was tracking various phenomena that I found across these different art histories, and I started interpreting them not as, intentional gestures towards where we are, but early signs of a certain mindset that we currently take for granted, but it actually came from somewhere. I loved that moment when we had a two screen kind of like conversation between the scene where the Lumiere brothers train was entering the station, right? Which obviously there's this whole legend about people like escaping the room. It's not really true, but there's this train, and then exactly 100 years later, like Tom Cruise is riding the TGV train in Mission Impossible 1. And it's the same creative ambition that nourishes that scene. It's that intention of the director to put you in a place of illusion that you are on that train with him. And so the whole history of cinema, when you look at James Cameron's doing, there's a lot of that obviously happening on different layers of what we understand by um, putting a person in an environment. Sometimes it's purely psychological, sometimes it's it means directly what it means. But obviously, all the experiments with how we I would say, converse with technology to change our thinking about, who is the subject, who is the object, who is the author, like how do we converse with various phenomena that are transforming theater when from a place of presenting a world to a public, you actually bring the public into the world and you make them part of the show. So in a way, you can think that, but please don't quote me on that, is that when you think about Richard Wagner's concept of Gesamtkunstwerk, uh, the sphere is that. The sphere is a total work of art, and when it opened, we all realized like, okay, like this is it. This is a total work of art. And so the roots of this movement are in so many different disciplines. There's no one genealogy. There are all these bloodstreams that are feeding into what we do today. And how is that possible? Well, I think it's possible because immersive art, contrary to what we think, is not about technology at all. It is actually about responding to people's needs, observing how the world and the society is changing, and then finding a way through the creator's intuition to respond to it. And that's the driving force behind immersive, because there's a reason why at the same time creatives are attracted to certain ways of telling stories, and at the same time the public is ready to consume it. And this is a social need, it's not a technological thing. It also has consequences because it means that if immersive has so many parents, it means there are different languages, different production models, different distribution models. Money is coming from different sources, and the creative processes look different. It's different if you're working with a visual artist, and when you're working with a dancer, it's different when you're working with a games designer and when you're working with a sound composer, but it can still be an immersive experience and it can be perceived as such. Why is that immersive renaissance happening in 2020s? It's not something that is a phenomenon that is happening this year. It started a couple years ago. I believe that this is a part of the wider shift in which we approach our culture in general. The just
In progress.
top line.
Top line.
Someone's repeating my words. Okay, so just some top line elements here, like we're putting people at the heart of the work, which is a new thing compared to like historically how people used to consume culture or engage with art. There is that increasing need that people want to be part of a story. They want to feel like this is made for them, even if it's not as an experience that they do individually. They still want to make us feel like that was made for me. I'm being considered as part of it. There is obviously an increasing need, we call it like, let's meet the public where it is. But when you look at different types of phenomena, not only urban planning, what's happening with real estate, what's happening with events like the opening of Paris Olympic Games. As you can remember, it happened in the city of Paris. It was not in the stadium anymore. It was brought to streets because people were experiencing as if it was part of the canvas that the city is for culture. Obviously, there are multiple needs that were kind of amplified by the pandemic. The fact that people wanted to be together, that they are craving collectiveness. They realized how lonely and secluded we are in our day-to-day experience. But there's also a lot of the social validation that came with the launch of the Sphere, the launch of Apple Vision Pro. Like all these huge marketing machines have gave value to things that were developed usually by niche creators or people who were like considered a little weird. Now it's like everywhere, and it gave us time to develop skills we needed so that we have people who understand how to build these worlds, and we know how to innovate at that. So my conclusion is that it's not a discipline, it's not a standalone medium, it's a methodology. And that methodology is drawing from different art forms, but it also means it can be applied to almost anything you can imagine. Gwyneth Paltrow is going to sell you her eye cream in an immersive, activation, and Shirin Nishat is going to make you feel like you're going to be beaten by soldiers. And so you cannot think of things that are more radically opposite, but it's still the same principle. You are at the heart of that story. And we developed expectations across, various practices that we were cultivating online and offline that actually have set the stage for this phenomenon. We consume knowledge, art, and entertainment differently. We are different people and we expect different things from life. So it's the audience behavior that drives the trend and not technology and not the gatekeepers. Why it matters, I'm really ending right now, and now it's going to be serious. I truly believe that culture is a response to the changes in reality that we live in. It either is a symptom or it's a consequence of it. And this is something we should be looking at. And if you make an immersive work from a place of care, it always creates a temporary community. This is the superpower of immersive. And I want to say that a community is the only single technology that we have invented as a species that can allow us to fight fear, injustice, and pain. Thank you.
All right, Anna, that was fantastic. I know there are going to be so many questions. So the way we usually do it, is if you have a question or you can either drop it in the chat and I can read it for you, or if you want to go camera on and ask and do that, or actually, drop it in the chat and then I'll call on. I can call on you. That's probably the better way to do it. That way we have a sequence. Okay, so. If you have okay, so if you have any questions, just drop it in the chat and then indicate whether you want to ask or what you want me to ask. While we're waiting for that to happen, I'm one of the you mentioned Jean like Christo's work, and I think what's really interesting about Christo's work was that they funded it all through their drawings and the artifacts, and I think that's like one of the things that's really interesting as we think about art and immersive art is like, how do you monetize it? Do you monetize it as an experience? Do you monetize it as art? Where then it requires an artifact. I think there's just a really interesting sort of challenge of sort of like trying to figure out like, how, you know, do you classify this as something that's ticketed, or do where you're paying for the thing, or are you paying for the artifact of the thing? I think it's just something I'm always sort of puzzling over. I'm curious of your thoughts.
Well, I want to say that, this is not a helpful answer, is that it's a case by case business model analysis. You
Yeah.
can, because, and this is also part of this funny diagram where, depending on like what we're dealing with, if we're looking, well, let's say we're looking at it as a product, right? There's a set of circumstances you need to take under consideration, like where are you going to show it, for how long, like who's the target audience, like what kind of tools you need, who's going to be doing it, who's paying for it, and then obviously there are various ways of approaching it. That conversation looks differently in the independent sector, it looks differently in the commercial sector. But I want to say that, for instance, we've been through so many discussions with different artists and studios about, the fact that the central experience is when you're really interacting with the work and you have this communal encounter with it. But there are all sorts of, artifacts that you can monetize afterwards. I mean, there's a certain, urge to have a souvenir or a memory of something that was valuable to you. If I could have prints from all the works that I curated, like I would be the a very happy person and I would pay a lot of money for it, but it just doesn't exist, It's not like the artists I work with are just like very few are doing it. But this is just an example, but I do believe that, there's also something that I remember we were talking about with Hunter from Art Science Museum many, many years ago, that, there was this whole community around Punch Drunk and Sleep No More, and it was an insanely powerful byproduct of the success of this show. And in a way, the elusiveness of that experience, the fact that there's nothing that remains same as in every, theater experience, it makes it potentially attractive for us. Like, how can I create something that people can keep? But also, it's also the dramatic beauty of the fact that that's the thing. It's an experience. When you look at the trend reports about how luxury brands are thinking right now about experiences as being what is more interesting for them than anything else, it's because, more and more people can afford to get a product. When you think about fashion houses, you know, they've noticed that the exclusivity of that offering is no more. So instead, if we can offer an experience that is only available for a limited time to a limited number of people, that creates the value and that creates the kind of legend around it. So, but I guess that's a whole conversation.
Oh, I love it. I love it. No, it's quite the rabbit hole. I we could definitely go down that. Brett had a question. Brett, do you want to ask? Do you want me to ask?
Oh, sure. I thought you were asking. Hi, Anna.
Oh, Brad. Hey, man. How are
Um,
you?
Mike, nice to see you. Great talk.
I know him.
Oh,
Okay. My question was, what are your thoughts for this community of practice as we prepare for the VR winter that will follow Meta's seeming departure?
I mean, it's obviously difficult to think about what happened because we know so many people who are part of this community, and it's always heartbreaking to hear. Um, but I mean, it's been such a resilient group of people. Like VR people have been around for like 20 years, and they've been through so many winters, and um and we're still there in a way, and some leave and some leave and return. I mean, from a corporate or business perspective, it's obviously a very different type of question because it means like, what do you do with this talent, with those resources? But you know, I mean, I hope that the capacity of people who are so well trained, who are so dedicated and passionate about what they do, that it either goes into, a more entrepreneurial approach, that there's going to be more startups that will also introduce solutions that, big ships cannot bring onto the market. Meta, we always kind of like criticize Meta for many decisions, design decisions, because we were never happy with what it was, but then we were like, I understand, it's a big decision for a company to take, but when you're a small studio and you're hiring like 10 people, like you can move fast and you can build things that, other people can't. So I'm always hopeful that the crisis is a beginning of a new wave of enthusiasm because it brings people together. And then when people are together, they just start coming up with ideas and usually something comes out of it.
yeah. I love it. I love it. Yeah, I always think about the old tree that falls in the forest. It produces life. And it's a big tree. Um, Jenjoy, you had a question.
Yeah, so my question was about um the focus on secular, and then I was thinking about the performance and installation artists, from the 60s on, probably earlier, which where ritual played a real serious role. And I just wondered like what your thoughts
Hmm.
were about the role of ritual and the spiritual in these kind of immersive discourse or conversation. And I know there's a lot of commercial focused folks here, but I was just curious what your thoughts were about that.
I think this is a great question because I think a lot of how I see, immersive as a creative phenomenon is coming from the fact that it's very strongly rooted in ritual and how people are you know, using the fact of gathering together to like leave transformed, if you see what I mean. And it might
Hmm.
be, a secular experience, it might be a religious experience, but the principle, like the backbone is similar in many ways. And I I mean it's always a double-edged sword, right? You can use it to create gatherings that will increase social phenomena that we might find harmful or radical, but you can also use it for people to find respite from like what's happening in the online world. And I sense, and I have a lot of conversations with people about that role of immersive right now, is that the kind of like communal aspect of it will become increasingly important for people because you want to find space where you can leave behind like the world that where the screen world. And I mean, this is how I should call it. And and I think that, directors and artists who understand rituals, who understand theater, who understand, the way, we look at, situations differently the minute when there's like a group of people and something that you can call a stage. I think there's still so much untapped potential in it.
Oh, that's great.
It's just expensive to run, and kind of like it's not maybe that expensive to produce, but it's expensive to run because it's always human presence in the contemporary market is always considered, a cost. But I think this is maybe not the best way to approach it because it's probably the most interesting part of it at the end of the day.
I love it. I'm gonna throw something in very quick. I mean, I think it's actually so funny because when we do these presentations, we always see like our team lab and our punch drunk slides, but we never show mega churches. And I think those are like actually probably some of the examples of like the
Yeah,
most effective, like a
yeah.
immersive experience design that's happening. It's just not. It's just happening in a place that we wouldn't. We don't want to call. We don't want to pull in as an
Well,
example of our
many,
craft.
many, many art, experiences draw from like, sacrum and rituals, and I'm thinking about, I mean, this is not obviously in any way like an immersive art example, but when you're thinking about the Rothko Chapel and how, it was conceived as something that, should transgress religion, but still offer a spiritual journey in a place that is designed for it and made for it. It's a very interesting way to look at it. And it's also reflecting a lot of the weight of the history of the 20th century.
Fantastic. Ava had a question she wanted me to ask. She wanted to hear about the overlap with interactive art, and I guess that's an interesting question. Is like, what do we qualify as art, and what do we qualify as design, and yeah,
Yeah.
like what does
I mean,
interactivity in art mean?
I will maybe focus on the interactive rather than on the what
Sure.
qualified art. But I think that, there's a lot of conversation about to what extent interactivity and immersive is something that we expect or require. And then it obviously also creates a question like, what do you mean by interactivity? Because, we tend to think that interactivity is like, it's like an audio reactive structure or like touch the screen or like, but interactivity is technically about how do you think about stimulating agency that makes sense for the viewer and the work at the same time. Like
Yeah,
if this is like a forced interactivity, like in VR we've seen there are so many examples in VR where there's a voiceover saying, and now you should do this, and you're like, why? No, right? And I never do it because I'm like, don't say that I have to, like, make me understand that I should make a gesture because it brings value to the narrative and then to the continuity of my journey. And then you do it naturally, and then the kind of gratification it brings, it's incomparable. Like when you have an experience of working with like a successful interaction, it feels almost like there's like an invisible person taking you by the hand. It's like it's a wonderful experience, but when it's done in a way that feels like a task, like your homework, like, um, that's definitely always sometimes immersive is better without interaction, but I think if you know how to do it and you have a reason to do it, it becomes a whole other thing.
I love it.
But the
Uh,
cool thing about interactive is that it works so well also on like online and on screen based. Like we're having Brett Gaylor who's here. Like for me, he was like the hero of the golden era of like interactive web docs. And
mm,
when he did not track, it was like all about interactivity and like seeing what happens when you kind of like engage with it. Like I feel like that genre was such an unexplored area and that we gave up on it too soon. But you don't have to be in a spatial environment for that.
yeah, no, I actually I love the fact that you mentioned the word agency because I think agency is actually more interesting than interactivity in some ways.
It is.
Should you had a question? Here, that's your scream name. All right, I see you going. Are you going for? Do you want me to ask? Oh, wait. Your screen name is Shut. You are wearing a black shirt.
Okay, sorry, Christopher. Yeah, Christopher.
Christopher, there you
Sorry,
go.
I didn't realize my last name was there. Sorry, apologies.
Sorry, all good,
And
all
yeah,
good.
yeah.
I could see you in the middle of my screen, so I want to
No,
make
no,
sure
no,
you're
okay.
there.
Thank you, first of all, Anna. Great presentation. There's a lot of like world building and the experiential design part is kind of my passion. So the question was on. I was just listening to Andrew Huberman, of all people, talking to Balaji in Singapore, and they're talking about world building. How we're going to have these worlds you can speak into existence. Balaji's latest project is actually creating communities that become these immersive spaces, right? So he's picking the brain of Andrew Huberman and talking about how Andrew's view is that everything revolves around how you get up in the morning, seeing sunlight, cortisol. Can you imagine that you have these immersive footsteps taking you towards the window so you can get the right amount of sun and all? This could all be artistic, or it can be a transformative experience. But where do you see this going? Do we integrate art in our supermarkets or in our daily lives, or where do you see the limits? Because this is definitely transformative.
It is. And I mean, I would love to listen to that conversation because, I mean, Hosea always had like amazing ideas and like, so it's, I kind of want to say that I think this has already happened in a way. Like I had this reflection many years ago that, it's almost like you're living in an environment, like for me, digital and physical, like they live together. Like I don't see, how they could be separated anymore, which is good and bad news. And it's like my life is a life in a stream of different triggers, and I don't even divide them anymore into what they used to be. Like this is art, this is literature, this is sports, this is news, this is like when I look at how my brain is absorbing, you know, phenomena from the external world, it's just one stream. And in a way, a moment when you go from media to realities is just one step. In a way, I mean, so the whole idea of like spatial culture, which is exactly what you described. It's just very sophisticated in how, it's like working. And this is about interaction design, right? So, when you think about triggering, footprint through light and kind of like making it happen. And I mean, this is interaction design. And if it's embedded in the real life space around you, it's technically what probably we would call like a highly sophisticated immersive experience. So then the question is like, of course, how do you choose or filter what you want to have in your reality in terms of those layers or these kind of interventions, however we want to call them,
right.
And who's
you've got
controlling
context windows.
and who's controlling them, right? Because at the end of the day, this is not a conversation. This is not going to become a conversation about big tech, but like it is a matter of like who's the gatekeeper, like who's in charge of the data that is coming in and out at the end of the day. So not sure if that answers the question.
Callie, you had a question. I'll give it a second. I can also ask for you. Is she asking me? It's a very long question. Okay, I'll ask. All right, unless she's jumping on right now. All right, I'll ask. Do you see digitized access to major museum collections, archives, and similar initiatives like online galleries as working alongside immersion or potentially against it?
Okay, well, so this is actually my dream topic, and maybe Josh wishes this is the new business we're going to fund together.
Perfect.
So okay, let me start this way. So I was listening to, so when Glenn Laurie stepped down from his function at MoMA, like a year ago, after his incredible tenure, he was in his talk where he announced it, has speaking about a concept of imaginary museum by Andre Malraux, and he had this photo of like him Malraux looking at all these images put on the floor of his office, and he was speaking about how the museum as a concept can kind of like grow and extend ad infinitum in various layers of reality, the ones we know and the ones that we still don't know how to work with. And then he said something, and I would need to look in my notes, so forgive me if this is wrong. He said something like, so MoMA is receiving like this and this amount of million visitors every year, but online there's like 40 million people every day interacting with this museum. Okay. So the potential of creating a whole new layer of like how you can work with this reach and capacity is extraordinary. And I think there's not a single institution in the world that I've seen kind of like cracking the code for like how do you, because I mean there are digitized collections, there are like online channels, podcasts, some organizations do it in a more successful way, some are like trying to figure it out. But if you imagine a world where you can actually have your personal spatial version of a museum that you love, and you can kind of like have bits and pieces of it the way you like it around you to kind of like nourish your day and connect with people who are doing the same in their respective, geographies. Like this can go so far, I mean, I don't see why we should not be, imagining this, because this is how we can not only protect the culture we have, but we can also learn how to share it with people in new ways. And obviously, having an online collection is not the way to do it, but it's a start.
Oh, and I feel like we could go down the rabbit hole on this one because I have so many thoughts. But I mean, I'm
Yeah.
going to just interject quickly because I've worked with so many of these museums and their collections. But I think they a lot often like treat them like artifacts, just like images that could be displayed or collaged or reused in some ways, and they don't really necessarily connect them to the ideas or the identity and the potential for the conversations. So like I feel like there might need to be like some. Yeah, there needs to be some shift as like, and it might have to something to do with the fetishization of artifacts. Anyway, I'm not gonna monologue on that thing. Anastasia, you had an interesting question. I love to ask that one.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to ask. And Anna, thank you so much. This was so super crystallizing for me around a lot of questions that I've had recently. Um, my question is really about the when your last slide when you talk about immersive art being the only technology we have to fight fear and the way that it builds communities. I work with a lot of nonprofit organizations on cultural strategies to advance awareness and policy for social justice issues. And I've been sort of beating the drum for a long time around immersive installations, immersive art, and entertainment as ways to really, create moments around these issues and the awareness that they're trying to build, as opposed to just like, shoving out information or trying to make people feel specific things. And I keep coming up against this issue that like immersive art and technologists are really siloed from movement folks, and I'm sort of exploring how what are the best ways to bring immersive artists together in collaboration with movement activists and art activists in a way that we can, sort of foster those capabilities for fighting fear and building community.
This is an amazing topic. It's extraordinary. Thank you so much for bringing this up. It's been, I mean, from my independent industry days, this has been 80% of the conversations we've been having. And I'm fascinated with the fact that well, many, but probably most of independent artists who are playing with immersive tech, they are so driven to social justice and to topics that are kind of like representing exactly what you said. And this is actually, I think, it has to do with two things. One is, it becomes a space that is a community building opportunity because you're presenting the work and bringing people in, but it's also the process of making it, the collectiveness, the co-creative process of working with people from different communities, but also like the way the process. This is why I'm so obsessed. And Josh, this is part of our LinkedIn exchange on like, I mean, you have to have humans at the center of the process all the time because the process is sometimes more interesting than the result. But it's not only a process that is instructive and healing, but it's bringing value to people's lives. It could change a person's life. But what I want to say is that we have on the call a great friend of mine, Jasmine, who's working with a beautiful nonprofit called the GOG, and this is what they do. This is an organization that was funded to work with social impact creatives and to connect people who are activists with artists and to fund and promote and support these projects. And it's very rare. It almost feels like a miracle that it happened. Like, it's not something that happens every day. So like I'm thinking, the universe that it exists, and I hope it will live long and prosper. But there are people in the industry who are kind of like those bridges to answering your questions. So, you know, um, maybe Jasmine, you want to say a couple of words about it, but if not, I'm always happy to share like contacts or to tell
We'd
you at
love
least
that.
what I know about. Yeah, but it has huge potential, and I do think, and I had that conversation today with a friend of mine, because this whole sentence about community being the technology that is helping you fight fear, injustice, and pain is something that I only came up with when I realized that immigration and changes that immigration causes that I experienced firsthand are making are creating this kind of loneliness, existential loneliness that you can never feel. Like the sense of belonging that is gone once you've left the place you used to call home. I mean, even if you're not escaping, soldiers that are putting guns on your head, like it's always there. And my passion with this industry and this type of art is coming from the fact that I'm constantly looking for a family. So I'm looking for communities and I'm supporting others people's efforts to build communities because I lost one at least twice in my life. And when I'm looking at the world today, I know this is the only thing that can make people like make sense of this reality because it's so twisted and sick.
Oh,
Yeah.
fantastic.
I would love to follow up with you. Let me know how I can do that.
Of course, Josh, I
I'm
mean,
happy to facilitate.
Thank
Actually,
you.
Anna, that actually brings me. We're at the end. We're at time. It is at the end, and that actually is a perfect segue. How can people keep in touch with you? How can they support you? How would you have them act in the world? I will leave it to you, and I'll wrap it up there.
I mean, I have a LinkedIn account, and so if you use LinkedIn, this is how, we can connect. I'm not always in capacity to like respond immediately because I have a passionate full-time job. Um, but um, but yeah, and I don't do a lot of social media. I'm trying to use Substack, but I'm not very good at it yet. And but yeah, but maybe that's the best way to go.
Fantastic. Anna, thanks so much. This was an incredibly interesting presentation and conversation. There were so many other questions, so if you didn't have your questions answered, reach out to me. I'll try to see how I can facilitate as best I can. Hope to see some of you all over at Art World tomorrow. Anna, we will be in touch, and hope you guys have a wonderful one. I'll see you at a future.